Daniel's thumb hovered over his phone screen as the dull glow of his apartment flickered in the background. It had been another long day at the office, the weight of the deadlines and demands still hanging heavy in his mind. The apartment was quiet, the kind of silence that made everything feel too still, too empty. The harsh fluorescent lighting overhead cast sharp shadows across the room, emphasizing the solitude that had become his constant companion. His finger moved mechanically, swiping left on the endless sea of dating profiles. He wasn't expecting anything to stick, just going through the motions like he always did, clicking through faces and names that blurred together in an undistinguished mess. He hadn't had any real intention of finding anyone tonight. But then he paused. Something in the next profile caught his attention: Sophia. Her photo was vibrant, showing her midlaugh as she held a parachute harness in one hand, the sky wide and endless behind her. Her grin was infectious, a spark of energy that seemed to leap off the screen. She wasn't like the other women he'd seen. There was something different about her, something that made his heart skip for just a second. With barely a second of thought, Daniel swiped right, his curiosity piqued. For the first time in a while, hope flickered inside him. He didn't know what he was looking for, but he knew this woman was worth finding out. He continued scrolling, but his mind kept returning to her profile. There was something daring in her eyes, an unspoken challenge. Maybe it was the fact that she had a life that looked so different from his own, a life that was lived in full color, without the cautious filters he'd built up over the years. A buzz from his phone broke his thoughts. A message from Sophia. "Hey, I like your vibe. How about an adventure?" Daniel's heart raced a little, caught between excitement and something else, nervousness, maybe, but it was exhilarating. He wasn't sure why, but this felt different. He tapped out a quick response. "Sounds like you're offering a good one." A few seconds passed before the 3 dots appeared on the screen. "I'm always up for a thrill," she replied. "You?" He grinned to himself, his thumb poised to respond. The words came easily. "Thrill's my middle name." He paused for a moment, rereading the message. It was such a simple exchange, but something in the way she spoke made it feel like they were already in a conversation, as if the connection between them had started before either of them even knew it. The next few days were a blur of messages back and forth, light-hearted, playful, and filled with energy. Sophia's enthusiasm was contagious, and Daniel found himself looking forward to each new message. The topics ranged from skydiving in New Zealand to diving with sharks, her words carrying a sense of adventure that made him feel like he was stepping out of his comfortable shell. He wasn't used to this kind of energy. He liked it. As their conversation shifted from texting to discussing plans, Sophia suggested meeting up. "How about a drink?" she asked. "I know this great bar, chill vibe, nice drinks. Let's see if we can keep the energy going." Daniel agreed almost instantly. He wasn't sure what he was walking into, but something about her carefree attitude, made him want to take the plunge. For the first time in a while, he felt the anticipation of a night that might turn into something more than just another drink at a bar. When the evening came, he dressed with a little more care than usual. He wanted to look good, but not like he was trying too hard. The bar Sophia had suggested was one of those places that felt upscale without being pretentious, the kind of place that had a cozy ambience but still managed to feel a bit exclusive. Daniel arrived a little early, his hands clammy from both excitement and nerves. He stood by the bar, glancing around. The crowd was a mix of groups and couples, laughter and chatter filling the air. It was exactly the kind of place where a first date could go either way. Then, just as he was about to check his phone for the 10th time, he saw her. Sophia. She stood out immediately, her sharp eyes scanning the room with the kind of confidence Daniel couldn't ignore. She caught his eye, and her lips curled into a smile that seemed to light up the whole room. Without hesitation, she walked over to him, a graceful stride in her step. The moment their eyes met, Daniel felt it instant chemistry. "Hey," she said, her voice light and playful as she leaned in to hug him. Her touch was warm, familiar somehow, even though this was the first time they were meeting in person. "Hi," Daniel replied, feeling a little caught off guard by the intensity of her presence. They made their way to a private booth she had already secured, and as they sat down, the conversation flowed effortlessly. Sophia's laugh was like music, and her eyes sparkled as she spoke, recounting her various adventures with a mix of pride and excitement. Daniel listened, captivated, even though he couldn't help but feel a little out of his depth. Her stories were wild: bungee jumping in New Zealand, scuba diving in shark-infested waters. He found himself unsure whether to laugh at her audacity or question the risks she was so casually throwing out. Either way, he couldn't look away. "You've really done all that?" Daniel asked, trying to keep the awe out of his voice. Sophia grinned. "Of course. You don't get to live unless you take a few risks." Daniel nodded, absorbing the energy she radiated. There was something magnetic about her. She wasn't like the women he'd met before, people who played it safe, who went through life with a calculated routine. She was wild, unpredictable. And yet, there was a part of him that felt this magnetic pull, a voice in his head whispering that maybe he should try something new, step out of his comfort zone. "So, what about you?" Sophia asked. "What's your wild side like?" Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but found himself hesitating. He wasn't the adventurous type. He had never done something reckless, something impulsive. His life had been about stability, predictability. But in that moment, sitting across from Sophia, he felt the pressure to be something more. He wanted to impress her. "I guess I could be persuaded to try something new," Daniel said, his voice more uncertain than he intended. He saw Sophia's eyes light up at his words. "You're in for a treat," she said, leaning in slightly. "How about we do something wild tomorrow? Bungee jumping." The words hit him like a jolt of electricity. He blinked, caught off guard. "Bungee jumping," he repeated. The idea of throwing himself off a cliff, with nothing but a cord to stop him from falling, was terrifying. But there was something about the way she said it, so casually, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Yeah, it's my thing." "You'll love it, I promise," Sophia said, her tone light but with a hint of challenge. Daniel swallowed, his throat dry. His instinct was to say no, to find an excuse. But instead, the words tumbled out before he could stop them. "Yeah. Okay. Let's do it." Sophia smiled widely, her eyes gleaming. "Great. You won't regret it." As the night wore on, Daniel felt the excitement from the drinks and their conversation settle into something else, nervousness. It was a bizarre feeling, a mix of anticipation and dread. He couldn't decide whether he was looking forward to the jump or whether he was starting to regret the decision. But he pushed the doubt away, telling himself that maybe, just maybe, this would be the adventure he needed. Sophia was right, he had spent far too long living inside his safe little box. And maybe, just maybe, this was his chance to break free. But as they stood to leave, heading for the door, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that he had just agreed to something that might change everything. The next day was filled with a strange tension. Daniel sat in the passenger seat of Sophia's sleek black car, staring out the window as they drove farther from the city. The buildings slowly gave way to open stretches of road, the horizon breaking into endless fields and trees. The usual urban buzz was replaced by the quiet hum of the engine and the occasional flicker of passing streetlights. Sophia was calm, almost eerily so, as she navigated the road with ease. Her fingers tapped lightly on the steering wheel in time to a song playing softly in the background. Daniel's thoughts were far less relaxed. He couldn't shake the feeling that something about all of this was wrong, too spontaneous, too much of a jump into the unknown. His heartbeat was a steady drum of anxiety as the city skyline faded into the distance, leaving them in a sea of green and brown. Sophia, her eyes always fixed ahead on the winding road, seemed completely at ease. There was nothing in her expression that betrayed any hint of worry. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his hands gripping the edge of his seat as the car sped down an isolated stretch of highway. The further they went, the more the unease settled in his chest. He tried to ignore it, to push it down, but it sat there like a weight, heavy and pressing. Sophia glanced at him briefly, her lips curling into a smile as she noticed his tension. "You okay?" she asked lightly, her voice laced with playful concern. Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but found himself hesitating. He didn't want to sound like a coward. He didn't want to seem weak or unadventurous in front of her. "Yeah, just thinking," he finally said, forcing a smile. "This place seems kind of off the beaten path." Sophia laughed. "You think? That's the whole point. It's secluded, just how I like it. No distractions, just the jump and the thrill of it." "This is it," Sophia announced cheerfully, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. She pulled into a gravel lot and parked the car, leaving Daniel with no choice but to follow her. Sophia didn't notice his hesitation. She was already walking toward the instructor, a lean man in his late 30s who wore an oversized jacket and a pair of sunglasses despite the overcast sky. He waved at Sophia, and she waved back, her energy unrelenting. I'll go check it out," Daniel said, his voice a little too tight. Sophia didn't respond, absorbed in her conversation with the instructor. Daniel stood at the edge of the clearing, his eyes scanning the empty landscape. The place felt more like a forgotten relic than an actual bungee jumping site, and his stomach twisted with dread. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was all wrong, that Sophia had led him here for some reason he couldn't quite put his finger on. But when he turned back to the platform, Sophia was already waiting for him, her arms outstretched in excitement. "Come on, Daniel. We're going to have so much fun." The instructor greeted him with a disinterested nod and began to strap Daniel into the harness. Daniel's hands trembled as the bungee instructor finished securing the harness around his body. The straps were tight, too tight, and the weight of the equipment pulled at him, making his chest feel heavy. He couldn't remember the last time he had been so aware of his own heartbeat, thudding relentlessly in his ears. Each breath felt shallow, like it might be his last. He glanced over at Sophia, standing by the edge of the platform, her arms crossed in front of her with a smile stretched across her face. Her calmness only made him feel more unsettled. She looked completely at ease, like this was just another day for her. Her eyes sparkled with excitement, and the wind tousled her dark hair as she watched him. But Daniel could only feel the pounding of his pulse in his temples, the gnawing feeling that something wasn't quite right. The scenery around him was stunning, with the river rushing violently below the platform, and the tall trees swaying in the breeze. Yet, all Daniel could focus on was the sheer emptiness of the place, the isolated silence that was deafening. It wasn't just the silence that unnerved him, it was the stillness that surrounded it. No one else was around. Just the instructor, Sophia, and him. His stomach churned, and for a moment, he almost wanted to turn around and leave, tell them that he changed his mind. But that thought was immediately crushed under the weight of his own pride. He had already said yes. He couldn't back out now. Not after everything Sophia had said, not after the promises of adventure. Sophia turned her head toward him, her expression softening, and for a fleeting second, there was a reassuring warmth in her gaze. "You'll be fine, Daniel," she said, her voice smooth and calm, like she was speaking to a child. "Just trust me. You'll love it." Daniel nodded, though the words didn't reach him. His throat was tight, and he felt as though every part of him was screaming to turn away, but he smiled, doing his best to suppress the tight knot forming in his chest. He wanted to believe her, wanted to think that this was just a step into something bigger, something bold and freeing. But something inside him whispered that it wasn't. The instructor stepped aside and waved his hand toward the edge of the platform. It was time. Daniel took a deep breath, the air crisp and sharp in his lungs, and looked down at the river far below. The rush of water was loud, almost deafening, and it was hard to believe that a thin cord tied around his waist would stop him from plunging into that violent chasm. He gripped the railing tighter, his knuckles going white, as he slowly inched his way toward the edge. Sophia's eyes were locked on him, her face expectant, but there was something different about her look, something sharp that sent a chill crawling up his spine. He could see the slight twitch of her lips, a barely there smile. The wind howled around him, forcing him to steady himself, but it felt like the world had gone still. His legs felt like lead, and every step toward the edge made his heart thud louder in his chest. Sophia didn't move, she just watched, standing a few feet away, her arms still crossed. There was no encouragement in her eyes now, no warmth, just an intensity that made Daniel question everything. "You got this," she said, but the words felt too rehearsed. Too perfect. His stomach churned again. He couldn't tell if it was the fear or something else, a growing unease that twisted inside him like a knife. But the more he looked at her, the more he wondered if she was watching him fail. If, in some twisted way, she was enjoying this. The instructor gave him a gentle shove forward. "Time's up, buddy," he said, his voice gruff, but not unkind. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He looked at the open space in front of him, the platform that was his only connection to the solid ground beneath his feet. Without thinking, he stepped forward. Though it felt like everything inside him screamed to stop. The moment his feet left the edge, the world exploded. The rush of air filled his ears, and the ground disappeared beneath him in a sickening jolt. For a split second, Daniel forgot to breathe. The only thing that existed was the pure, unfiltered adrenaline that surged through his veins. His stomach flipped as he plummeted toward the river, and for that brief moment, he felt free. It was the freedom he had been craving, the rush that Sophia had promised him. His heartbeat thundered in his chest, louder than the roar of the wind in his ears. It was exhilarating. But then, without warning, the world stopped. The bungee cord jerked violently, snapping Daniel back up in a brutal rebound. His body lurched, whipped into the air, and he let out a strangled gasp as the force of the cord stretched him back up. The thrill of the fall was instantly replaced by terror as the tension in the cord built, pulling at him, squeezing the air from his lungs. His stomach churned, the force of the rebound taking away his ability to think straight. His body swung uncontrollably, and he tried to steady himself, but the force was too much. He could barely keep his eyes open. What had gone wrong? The sensation of free fall had been brief, but this wasn't the rebound he'd expected. It was too violent, too uncontrolled. He felt his body sway unnaturally, swinging wildly like a pendulum, and his breath came in short gasps. Panic gripped him as he tried to focus on something, anything, that would help him make sense of what was happening. The river still churned beneath him, distant now, but its sound was growing faint, drowned out by the ringing in his ears. He opened his eyes to see the ground far below him. The force of the cord's pull was too much. It wasn't supposed to feel like this. Something was wrong. The voice that cut through his panic was unmistakable. "Well, look at you," Sophia's voice rang out above him, sharp and cold. Daniel blinked, barely able to make her out over the edge of the platform, her face framed by the metal beams above. But her voice, there was nothing warm about it now. There was no excitement. No encouragement. Just coldness. Her words slid into him like a blade. "Not so easy, is it?" Daniel's mind raced, the fog of fear thickening in his thoughts. "Sophia," he screamed, his voice breaking. He struggled against the bungee cord, trying to free himself from its vice-like grip. His hands fumbled with the rope, but the more he pulled, the more the cord twisted, swinging him uncontrollably in the air. Sophia's face appeared again, closer this time. Her eyes locked with his, and there was no longer any trace of the woman he'd met. The one who had promised an adventure. No, this was something else. You really thought I'd take you on an adventure, huh? She said, her voice cutting through the wind like a razor. This was never about a thrill, Daniel. This was about revenge. Daniel's heart skipped a beat as her words sank in. Revenge? What the hell was she talking about? His body jerked again, the force of the rebound pulling him higher, but the only thing that consumed him now was the growing realization that nothing about this was right. His mind raced, the pieces not fitting. He couldn't even comprehend what she meant. He opened his mouth to protest, but she wasn't done. It's not just about you, she continued, her voice now a chilling whisper, barely audible over the wind. It's about your family. Your precious little circle of people. Daniel's blood ran cold. No, he managed to whisper, the words barely leaving his mouth. Sophia leaned closer, her smirk twisted with malice. You don't know who you're dealing with. My brother's in prison because of your family. And now, I'm going to make sure you suffer. The words hit him like a physical blow, each one slashing through his chest, leaving him gasping for air. His mind reeled, everything coming apart. His grip on the bungee cord weakened, and the reality of his situation crashed over him. He was caught in the middle of something much bigger than himself. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a thrill. This was a game he hadn't even known he was part of. Sophia watched him, her eyes cold and calculating. And as the truth shattered his understanding of everything, Daniel realized that his life, as he knew it, was over. His breaths were shallow, his chest constricted. Panic surged through him like a tidal wave. The feeling of betrayal settled over him like a suffocating fog. This wasn't supposed to be an adventure. This wasn't supposed to be a thrill. He had trusted her. He had trusted Sophia. And now, he was trapped. His mind scrambled, the harsh reality sinking in as the adrenaline surged. How did I get here? He wondered. What the hell is happening? Sophia's words from their first meeting flashed through his mind, her smooth promises of excitement and adventure. The picture of her, so full of life. So effortlessly charming, none of it had been real. His throat tightened with the crushing weight of realization. Sophia had never meant any of it. She had never cared about giving him an adventure. He was never meant to be a part of her game. He had been a pawn all along. A tool for her revenge. As the realization hit him, a new wave of desperation flooded his veins. His arms burned with exertion, his body trembling as he struggled to free himself. The rope dug into his flesh, tearing at his skin as he twisted and writhed, trying to loosen the straps. Every time he made an effort to move, the harness pinched tighter, a cruel reminder of how trapped he truly was. Focus. Don't give up, Daniel's mind screamed at him. But the more he fought, the more exhausted he became. His body screamed in protest, every muscle aching, his vision blurring with the effort of his struggle. The bungee cord tightened once again, snapping him back upward, and he felt his stomach lurch with the force of it. His head spun with dizziness, and the pressure on his chest felt suffocating. But then, his fingers brushed against something. It was the buckle. His heart surged with faint hope as he found it, just a fraction of relief. The smallest victory, but it was enough to ignite something inside him. With a sharp grunt, he twisted his wrists and managed to loosen the straps just enough to relieve some of the pressure on his chest. The harness slackened, and for a brief moment, Daniel felt the cord give slightly. The air rushed into his lungs, and he gasped for breath, desperate for the sensation of release. But he wasn't free yet. His fingers shook as he worked at the straps, the effort draining what little energy he had left. Each tug felt like a battle, each movement exhausting his remaining strength. His arms burned, and his legs, locked in place by the bungee, felt like dead weight. But he could feel it now, the possibility of escape. His mind focused solely on that goal, freedom. His fingers slipped over the buckle, working it slowly, carefully. The cord slackened further, and with a final, desperate pull, the strap came loose. The harness loosened just enough for him to take a deeper breath, and the sudden relief was enough to ignite a surge of strength within him. He kicked his legs, pulling them free from the harness, but the cord still clung to him, swinging him like a rag doll through the air. His heart pounded, and for a moment, he thought he might finally break free. But then the world tipped. Daniel's body jerked again, and the rush of air swallowed him whole as he plummeted toward the earth. Time seemed to slow as he fell, his stomach lurching in terror. His mind screamed for him to brace for impact, but his body was too disoriented, too confused to react. The ground rushed up at him, the rush of wind deafening in his ears. He had no time to think, no time to prepare. Brace yourself. But it was too late. The earth slammed into him with bone-shattering force, the impact ripping through his body as if every joint, every muscle, every bone was being pulverized at once. The pain was immediate, intense, unbearable. His breath was knocked from his chest as his body crashed into the ground, the force of it sending a shockwave of agony through his entire body. He felt the ground tear at him as he rolled, the dirt and rocks scattering with the momentum, his limbs twisting unnaturally beneath him. His chest burned, his ribs screamed, but through the haze of pain, Daniel managed to keep moving. He had to move. Daniel staggered to his feet, his legs shaky beneath him. His body felt like it had been shattered, but he forced himself upright, gritting his teeth against the agony that coursed through him. Every breath was a struggle, pain radiating through his chest with each inhalation. His body trembled with the effort, but his mind stayed focused on one thing, survival. Keep going. Don't stop. She's not done with me, Daniel thought, his pulse quickening. This is just the beginning. Suddenly, the sound of a voice cut through the stillness. You really thought you could run, Daniel? The voice was sharp and mocking, dripping with amusement. Daniel froze, his heart sinking as the words sliced through the trees, ringing in his ears. It was her. Sophia. Her voice floated on the wind, light and carefree, like she was enjoying the chase. You're not going anywhere, she called out, her words echoing through the woods. He turned to look over his shoulder, his heart pounding in his chest. The woods were dark, the trees casting long shadows, but there was nothing in the distance, nothing but the creeping feeling of being watched. But he could feel it. She was there. Watching him. Tracking his every movement. The hunt had begun. The weight of the dark settled heavily on Daniel as he staggered through the woods, his chest aching with every breath. His body was battered, his muscles were stiff, his limbs trembling with exhaustion, but beneath the pain, a new surge of clarity began to take hold. The overwhelming fear and despair that had nearly consumed him moments ago started to recede, replaced by the stirrings of survival. You need to think, he told himself, forcing his mind to focus. He knew there was only one way out of this, outsmart her. He had to use everything around him, every scrap of knowledge he had, to turn the tables. The woods around him, so disorienting just minutes ago, now felt like a potential ally. The dense trees and underbrush could hide him, and the twisted roots and rocks could be used to his advantage. With a shaky hand, he reached into his coat pocket, feeling the familiar shape of the small knife he had kept on him since their first date. It was a tool he'd never expected to use for this, never dreamed he'd need it for survival, but it was in his hand now. The cold steel felt like a lifeline, a tangible connection to the possibility of escape. He gripped it tightly, the metal steadying him as he surveyed the area. He wasn't helpless. Not yet. Every snap of a twig beneath his feet sent a jolt of tension through his body. His breath came in shallow, controlled gasps, trying to stay as quiet as possible. He knew Sophia was somewhere behind him, lurking, listening, tracking his every move. Her voice had drifted through the trees, cruel and mocking. "You can run, Daniel, but you can't hide." He swallowed hard. He couldn't afford to be caught. Not now. The underbrush rustled beneath his feet, and he paused, listening for any sign of movement. He needed to stay ahead of her, to put distance between himself and the trap she was surely setting. But just as he took a cautious step forward, the ground beneath him shifted. No. His foot plunged into something, and before he could react, a snare tightened around his ankle, jerking him violently off the ground. The air whooshed out of his lungs as his body swung upward. For a heart-stopping moment, he hung upside down, helpless, the snare digging into his skin. His hands shot out instinctively, grabbing for anything to stop the fall. He reached out to grab a low-hanging branch and swung himself, using all his strength to unhook his foot from the snare just in time. With a grunt, he rolled to the side, his body slamming against the earth as he landed in a heap, gasping for breath. His leg burned from the sudden strain, but he barely registered the pain, his mind focused only on the fact that he had narrowly avoided being trapped. His pulse pounded in his ears, and his head spun, but Daniel didn't allow himself to linger. He could hear Sophia's voice in the distance, still mocking him, still playing her twisted game. But the trap had failed. She wasn't going to catch him that easily. His leg throbbed, sore and stiff from the near capture, but there was no time to stop. He pushed himself up and continued moving, every step now cautious, deliberate. The pain in his body, the exhaustion in his limbs, none of it mattered. Survival was all that mattered. His senses sharpened as he pushed forward. Every rustle in the underbrush, every shift in the wind sent his heart racing. He could feel Sophia getting closer, her presence like a shadow trailing him through the woods. But he wasn't about to let her catch him. Not again. Then, an idea formed in his mind, the desperation of the moment giving birth to a plan. He needed time. Time to get further away. Time to think. He could feel her closing in, could almost hear her breath, and the only way to survive was to buy himself a little space. He glanced around, his eyes landing on a large pit in the ground. It was the perfect place for a trap. Without thinking twice, he cut the branches with the knife and covered with branches and leaves, ensuring it looked as natural as possible, blending it into the surrounding ground. Once he was done, he took a step back, panting from the exertion. It was done. Now he just had to wait. Hiding behind a large boulder, Daniel crouched low, his breath shallow as he watched the trap. He knew Sophia was getting closer, the sound of her footsteps growing louder with each passing second. He could hear her muttering, her voice carrying through the trees, still taunting him, still making it clear that she thought this was all a game. "You can't run forever, Daniel," she called, her tone cruel and mocking. "I'll find you. And when I do, there will be no escape." Daniel's chest tightened, the blood pounding in his temples. He had no illusions that this was going to be easy. The hunt had only just begun. But he couldn't let her get to him, not yet. Not before he had a chance to turn the tables. As the footsteps grew closer, Daniel peered around the boulder, his heart racing as he watched Sophia move toward the area he had crossed just moments before. She was getting closer. Her eyes scanned the woods, her body tense, every step filled with purpose. She was moving slowly, methodically, but Daniel could see the sharpness in her gaze. She knew he was nearby. And she wasn't going to stop until she found him. Her mocking tone reached his ears again. "You think you can outsmart me? You're just another fool in a game you don't understand." Her words stung, but Daniel didn't react. He had to stay calm. He had to trust the trap. Sophia's foot landed on the branches just above the pitfall. For a split second, her eyes widened, and Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Then, with a sudden realization, she stumbled forward. She was sinking into the pit. Her expression twisted in frustration, and for a brief moment, Daniel saw a flicker of something vulnerable in her eyes. But that moment was brief. Sophia fell into the pit with a sharp gasp, her body crashing into the dirt with a thud. She cursed loudly, struggling to push herself up. Her eyes shot up toward Daniel's hiding spot, but he stayed silent, hidden behind the boulder. For a heartbeat, he could hear her scrambling in the dirt, her movements frantic. But Daniel didn't move. This was his chance. He had to move forward while she was distracted, while she was trapped in the pit. With a deep breath, he took a step back and slowly began to make his way out of the woods, each step careful, measured. The distant sound of Sophia's voice, now laced with frustration, was all the motivation he needed. He wasn't free yet, but this was the first real chance he had to escape. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Daniel emerged from the dense trees into a small clearing. The sunlight hit his eyes, momentarily blinding him, but for the first time in hours, he felt a flicker of hope. The edge of a road appeared ahead, the faint sound of an approaching car in the distance. He had made it. He wasn't dead yet. He wasn't finished. With every ounce of energy left in him, Daniel pushed forward, his legs weak but moving with purpose. The car passed by, and he flagged it down, his heart pounding in his chest. The driver slowed, eyeing him warily, but Daniel didn't hesitate. He threw open the door and slid into the passenger seat, barely able to get the words out. "Please, take me anywhere." As the car drove off, Daniel leaned back against the seat, his body aching, his mind racing. But for the first time, he allowed himself a breath of relief. He wasn't out of danger yet. But he was alive. And that was enough. For now.